As I sat in the living room with my family, I could hear the incessant and aggressive knocking on our doors and windows, the creature outside trying to lure us out into the night. The sound of its voice was twisted and inhuman, a grotesque mimicry of the human voice that only wanted to lure us out. Take a glance at it. My wife and children huddled close to me, fear etched on their faces as we waited it out, knowing that we had to survive until sunrise. I could see the fear in my wife's eyes, but I knew that I had to stay strong for my family. The creature outside was relentless, constantly trying to find a way into our home. It would slam against the windows, scratch at the doors, and let out an otherworldly scream that chilled me to the bone. Somewhere throughout the night I realized it could only get in if we let it in, which was why it constantly tried to lure us outside, and slammed the walls in frustration when we didn't. I had to protect my family, keep them safe from this creature that stalked our neighborhood in the dead of night, picking a house each nightfall to torment. So we waited, all of us holding our breath as we listened to the creature's every move. As the night dragged on, the creature's tactics grew more desperate. It started to mimic the voices of our loved ones, calling out to us from outside. It was a sickening ploy, designed to trick us into opening the door and letting it in, and it impersonated the voices of fucking police officers who had come to check in on the neighborhood. "Don't," I said. "It's the thing." "But I called the cops," my wife, Jolene whispered. "If it's them, they'll push their way through. It's the creature, I just know it. Look at the silhouette on the window. It's way too big to even be human." I wasn't fooled. I knew that this was not the police or either my wife or children calling out to me, they were right fucking beside me, staring at the windows and doors in anticipation. When it mimicked the voice of a dead sibling, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I stood my ground against the creature's wicked schemes. I could hear it moving around outside, scratching and clawing at the walls of our home, trying to find a way inside as the night dragged on without stop. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to peek over the horizon, the creature outside let out one final scream, as the sound of scuttling appendages and dragging, wet flesh echoed in our minds and ears. It was a sound of anger and frustration, as if it knew that it had been defeated, failed to catch its prey in next dinner. And then it was gone, fading away into the morning light. We all let out a collective sigh of relief, our tense bodies finally relaxing as we realized that we had made it through the night. But when I opened the door, I saw the bloody, mutilated uniforms of 2 policemen, and a trail leading into the alleyways and farther into the unknown. I've always been the chubby kid, constantly being teased by my peers for how heavy was. I never really understood the big deal. I mean, yeah, I'm overweight, but what's that got to do with you? And for that reason I was tormented every day. Standing next to my classmates it was evident of my size, but when I would go home, well, that's where I would be the smallest. I come from a long line of, let's just say, obese people. Every morning my mother would make her usual for me and my father, pancakes with mountains of sugar and syrup, only to follow up dinner with a meal just as gluttonous. This was an everyday occurrence, and to be honest I loved it. I mean, what kid doesn't want to eat an endless serving of junk food? It wasn't until my father became ill and started to lose weight did I even fathom the idea that we could be thin, that I could be thinner. For some reason my father being ill didn't worry my mother, rather, it was the losing weight part that kept up at night concerned. She constantly would feed him infinite of amount servings while rejecting the prescribed medication that was given to him, knowing that it would only suppress his appetite. "You have to eat, you have to force," my mother would tell my bed-ridden father as he gasped for oxygen. I didn't know what to think. I found it odd, but it was my parents and I figured my mother knew what was best. Perhaps she thought her cooking could nurture my father back to health. Unfortunately that wasn't the case. He passed away. I didn't get to tell him goodbye or even see him. My mother took him away before I had the chance. She told me that she knew he would pass soon and that she took him to some special home where you don't receive any treatment, instead you pass peacefully. At this point I was entering high school and I was left completely devastated. All I wanted to do was eat. It made me feel better. My mother did her best to console me in the only way she knew how. In her cooking, I must have ballooned up to at least 300 pounds, something that delighted my mother. As years came and went I only grew more lonely. I had no friends, no girlfriend, no companions of any kind whatsoever, except for my mother. Remember, you have to keep eating, it's the only way, it's how we keep safe, my mother once told me. I was confounded with what she meant, but my appetite only grew, so I followed her advice. As I entered my 30s a revelation dawned on me in the most profound way, which was, for being an obese person I was perfectly healthy. I finally had convinced myself that it was time for me to get in shape. The loneliness had inundated my very being and I knew if I was ever going to be happy I needed to lose weight. So I went to a doctor for a checkup, something I have never done before. For some reason my mother never took me to doctors, and the only reason my father had went when first becoming ill was that he had fainted at work and his employer called for an ambulance. Besides that time we were a family that never went to get checkups. My face froze with utter bewilderment when the doctor told me I was fit. In fact he said that I was healthier than most men in their 30s. My mouth gaped open, not understanding how that could be possible. I had new outlook on life and I wanted to do whatever it took to shrink down, so I did the typical. I went for runs, reduced my calorie intake, I even flirted with the idea of taking steroids, but no matter what I did, I just couldn't lose weight. I would grab at my belly fat and curse at it as if it were some foreign invader attacking me with its presence, and after months of trying I began to accept the reality that solitude would engulf me for the rest of my life. That's when one of my coworkers gave me the suggestion of surgery. "You mean like sewing my stomach shut?" I apprehensively asked my coworker. He just stared at me with a hideous smirk on his face. "No bro, like get the doctors to suck the fat out of you," he said. I never thought about surgery before. I mean, I always figured one day I would need it, but never did I imagine of losing body fat that way. So I went to see the doctor about surgery, and to my thrill I was told this was an option. The doctor told me it would be a series of procedures, that they couldn't just take it all out of me at once, so I reluctantly agreed. I called my mother with the revelation of my plan. I needed a comforting voice to reassure me I would be okay, but my mother didn't coddle me. Instead, she scolded me. "I told you, you have to eat, it's the only way to stay safe," she told me. To my horror, I just needed her to be supportive. "What do you mean safe?" "It's because you mom that I've grown to this size, that I'm miserable, that I'm lonely," I told her as anguish protruded from my weary voice. She remained silent for several seconds, leaving regret simmering on the tip of my tongue for being so aggressive. "I tried to keep your father from losing weight, it's his fault, he wanted to lose weight and that's why he got sick. I couldn't save him after that," my mother told me, then promptly hung up on me. I didn't know what she was talking about, but her words grew concern in me, now thinking if my mother had anything to do with my father's sudden illness. I didn't talk to my mother for months after that. I didn't want anything more to do with her nonsense, so with that I began my ascent into a life of happiness. The first surgery was an absolute success. Within the first few weeks after the swelling had gone down, visible results were evident. My face looked thinner, I think I could even see a bit of jawline. To say the least, I was jovial at the revelation and I couldn't wait for my next surgery. By surgery 3 I was down 100 pounds and it left me feeling ambitious to do whatever it took to lose more weight naturally. I went back to the gym, now delighted to take off my oversized sweater to lift weights. I went morning runs and I cut out all the sugar I could from my diet. I guess you could say I was one of those people, the type that makes you roll your eyes whenever you saw a health-conscious person. Surprisingly, this newfound perspective led me into a journey of self-discovery. Now I like to go out and talk to people, no longer encapsulated in my own sorrow, rather I was out making friends and even talking to women. Life was perfect. Whenever I looked in the mirror I saw the man that I was always meant to be. My face had features, my arms displayed strength, but more importantly I now smiled. By the time my final surgery arrived I was down nearly 200 pounds, and if you didn't look close, you would have never thought I was ever overweight. The only thing that remained was my stomach. I still had a bit of gut, the stubborn belly fat just didn't want to melt away. "I don't know how to tell you," the doctor said. Whenever a medical professional tells you these words you can literally feel your heart sink. I was almost sure that whatever words came next was my death sentence. Echoes of my mother telling me not to lose weight danced around in my thoughts. "What is it, Doc? Tell me," I nervously responded back. A bit of silence grew between the two of us as our eyes remained locked on each other in this critical game of chicken, as if the first to look away loses. "We can't do the last procedure. Well, we don't recommend it, you see." The doctor paused. "We believe that you might have a tumor of some sort underneath that last layer of belly fat. We need to do more tests." And just as I thought my world shattered, memories of my father becoming ill began to make sense. Whatever was happening inside of me must have had happened to him. I decided against more tests. I knew what the outcome would be and was so happy. I was finally living life to the fullest, so I just ignored the issue that was unraveling inside of my body. I continued exercising along with a nutritional diet. I did everything I was doing before. I even had a girlfriend. She was like me, once overweight but now thin. I didn't tell her of my possible demise. I figured, why bog her down with my problems? Instead, I showered her in affection. I wanted to build a life, not plan out a death. But to my dismay, that's when the stomach pains began to happen. It was like nothing I've ever experienced. Shooting pains would travel from gut throughout my body, causing me to erupt into uncontrollable shaking. I did my best to hide it from my girlfriend, but as the weeks came and went, the sudden convulsions I would encounter only became more frequent and the tumor started to grow. My girlfriend thought I was gaining weight. I needed escape. I needed solace from the city, from my girlfriend. I just needed time to accept my fate, so I went back home to my mom's house. My mother, who I hadn't seen in years, was gleeful at my presence, but her jovial expression only sank after she studied me for several seconds, understanding how thin I had gotten, and with such haste she pulled me into her embrace, sobbing delicately to herself. I didn't know what to think, so I did the only thing I could think of, and that was I held her back and began to cry myself. As usual, she prepared a huge meal for me, with all the fixins, and to finish off the gluttonous dinner was a 3-layer chocolate cake. To be honest, after almost a year of eating healthy, tasting my mother's home-cooked food was a pleasure that couldn't be described by words. A sensation of transcendence, and as I swallowed each bite I could feel tears form on the edges of my eyes as my taste buds became inundated with an ambrosia of flavors. I was home. Sitting at the dinner table with my mother as my body slowly digested the pounds of food I had just ingested, we talked about a variety of subjects, but as I told my mother of how exciting my life had become, her eyes only directed their stare at my stomach. She could see how inflated my gut was. She could see the tumor. I crossed my arms, trying to shield my oversized gut from her not wanting to talk about my illness, but that's when an eruption of pain engulfed my entire body. My stomach pain had returned and I began to convulse violently in front of my mother, and all she could do was reach for my hand, trying to comfort me. After the seizure had calmed, I could read her eyes. It was the same look that was prevalent when my father was sick, but unlike that time, she now looked defeated. "About your father," she said as my breathing steadily calmed. "We're different. There's something inside of us and I can't tell you what it is, but it's something that wants to get out, and we have to do whatever it takes to keep it from doing that, because once it's out many will die." My eyes widened open with utter disbelief. What the hell was my mother telling me? Wait, what? It's a tumor, Mom, just like Dad had. Why do you have to play make-believe? I'm tired of it. Okay, just admit it, I angrily told her. I could see her brow dip down with a bit of frustration and her tender grip transformed into a tight one. "You have to gain weight, that's the only way we can keep it from coming out. It's not too late, my son," she told me as tears cascaded down her face. I pulled my hand away. I was tired of her nonsense, of her stories, and with that I stormed out her house and headed home. Seeing my mother was the refreshing sensation I needed to go back to the doctor for help. After all, my mother keeping me from medical treatment all these years has got me to where I am now. Entering my home, I called out for my girlfriend, ready to tell her the truth about my illness, how I was going to get treatment, that I didn't want to hide it anymore. At this point my tumor had grown to a hideous size and I found it difficult to breathe, but I did my best to shout out for my girlfriend. "Babe, I'm home, where are you? We need to talk," I gasped out loud with all the remaining strength I had. I could hear her soft voicing calling back out to me as her footsteps became more near, and that's when the pain once again returned. This time it was different. It was more excruciating. My body began to tremble and I grabbed at my stomach trying to massage it, hoping this episode would pass quickly, but to my horror it only got worse. I fell to the floor as screams of pain escaped my mouth. My stomach, it was expanding almost as if was going to explode. I squirmed on the floor, sweat drenching my body as froth began flowing out of my mouth. I clawed at my stomach wanting the pain to stop, and that's when I heard the shrieks of trepidation coming from my girlfriend. She rushed to my side trying to console me as her mind adjusted to what was happening, and that's when my stomach burst open. "Arg!" I yelped out. My stomach had completely exploded, blood and instance showered my hardwood floors, and my cries cautiously became whimpers as I could feel my vision become blurry. I could hear the screams of terror coming from my girlfriend, and that's when a hideous arm protruded from my gaping stomach. It was a grotesque thing. Its skin looked like it had scales, the edge of its fingertips revealed black pointy claws. I laid weak and somber. I really couldn't move. I couldn't do anything other than keeping my gaze on that horrid figure that was coming out of me, and soon I saw the head. The beast was more devilish than anything I could have ever imagined. It had 4 eyes and its teeth were endless. I couldn't make sense of what I was witnessing, and that's when my girlfriend let out a gasp of distraught, and I had utterly forgotten that she was there, and that's when that demon pounced on her and it began to eat her. I could hear her screams for help and my body laid still. I couldn't save her. All I could do is listen to her last gasps of life, to my dread. Once the creature was done we locked eyes and I gulped, accepting the situation for what it was, that I was going to die. To my surprise that monster sniffed me, its face practically touching mine, and its stench invaded my senses, and all I could do was shut my eyes tightly, but nothing ever happened. Several minutes had passed and I opened my eyes realizing the creature was gone. The living room lay desolated and still. It was just me alone in a puddle of blood. I don't know where that thing went. I'm starting to question my own sanity, but the blood is there, I know it's real, and my stomach is still gaped open. I can feel my mind drift. I think I'm dying, and the only thought that crosses mind is how I wish I just had listened to my mother. I should have never lost weight. My name is Quentin Lorino. I'm somewhat of a middleman in the criminal underworld. I mediate the crime families, I arrange diplomatic marriages, I keep things civil. But above all I host auctions. Art is a tastefully wonderful medium of laundering money, and hosting both underworld and legal auctions is kind of my speciality. And I also recover and sell cursed artifacts. I'm not intending to write about the people and things I deal with as the middleman here, though. No, I'm writing in regards to a very odd painting a client wanted me to recover. This deal, like the majority of my deals, was a perfectly legal deal. It started with the woman in my office. I owned an auction house downtown, and it had been a chilly morning, with wind and fog deep in my breath. Only I had the key to the place C, and when I saw the lock had been snapped clean I shuddered with more cold air than fear, and entered, a small pistol in hand. There were things in my offices ordinary people would freak out on. Dealings with the family. Strange artifacts that did things the normals could never understand, only good for laundering money. "Lorino," a voice called out, within my office, "old horse." I looked up to see an old, gray-haired woman, old enough she could have been my grandmother. "The mediator. I've been expecting you." For men, with weapons, I noticed, flanked the old woman. She was clearly someone important. "Are you here to make a deal?" I gingerly inquired. "A truce with an enemy?" "Nothing of that sort," she claimed, beckoning a hand and inviting me into my own office. "I'm here on a perfectly legal basis." "Says the woman who's broken into my office," I argued. She laughed heartily at that. "I understand, but I assure you nothing has been taken. I only wanted to," she gestured around, "ensure you were the real deal." "Which context?" I asked. "I've done many things. Artifacts of the odd kind," she revealed. So she wanted one of the weirder things I'd barred off. Something less than human and more ancient, creepy, bizarre. Cursed artifacts, odd devices, that kind. I occasionally deal in the divine. The old woman beckoned for me to take a seat, and so I did. She told her story then, the thing she had been searching for and the sums of money I would be paid. I'm looking for a very specific painting, she began, a very old one, painted in 1866. I suppose you don't know of the work of Isabella Corelli? I shook my head. I was not too familiar with the art I dealt with. No, my assistant Stephen dealt with that. Who? She was an artist touched by God. She painted many things in her youth, boring things, still life, the things that do not interest me. And one day, she was called by something beyond the veil, and from then on was possessed by a certain, she thought of the word, essence that gave her paintings, life. A bell rang in the distance. I checked the time. An auction was due to begin in an hour, and I assumed that was Stephen, getting things ready. I don't have all day for an art lesson, lady. Fair. I was a young girl when I saw it, the face of God, her last and final painting, she answered. This very auction house, when your father ran it. They were selling those artifacts, and I wasn't allowed to see what went on in there. But I hid somewhere and watched, she sighed. And then they unveiled their prize painting, Corelli's Face of God, and they screamed, every single person. I only saw a glimpse of the painting, but it was the greatest thing I had ever witnessed. Sorry, but as I recall I had read up my father's files a while back. Didn't everyone who saw that die? Indeed, the woman confirmed. But that glimpse, it was beautiful, and I am dying anyway, and if I were to die, I would die looking at the face of God. I know you have records on who bought it. I am willing to pay double to whomever made the purchase. It was so magnificent, beautiful, such sublime . Okay, I got it, I concluded. I'll find the painting. Now, I do have an auction to attend to. She had one of the men hand me a briefcase. Anything you need will be funded for. She handed me a card. Call me if you need anything. With that, the woman left, leaving me with a mission and an auction to run. I checked the briefcase. Dangerous or not, the money she offered would set me for life. It wouldn't be too hard to track down a painting, right? One that also massacred 50 people looking to buy the artifact. Stephen. I called. A bumbling old man ran over. I need to find those artifacts. It's called the Face of God. A Corelli? You want to mess with one of those? He warned, eyeing me closely. Isn't for me, I replied. Client, perfectly legal, is willing to pay the owners for it. We just gotta find out whomever bought it. And by we . You mean me, Stephen finished. I nodded, then informed him it was an auction my father had done. I'll be right on it. Whilst Stephen went off to check the records, I had a more pressing matter to deal with, the day's auction. But that was easy work, and I could trust my many other assistants with it. And the more I thought about the woman and her wishes of death, the longer my mind kept tugging at the name she'd mentioned. Isabella Corelli. I couldn't place it, but there was something deeply familiar about the name. It was one of those intuitions you just knew. So I called over a friend of mine, one who had a keener knowledge on those artifacts. He worked at a company that recovered them, and I'd long brokered a deal with him to smuggle some over from time to supplement my business. Quinton, he greeted, picking up my call. How are things over at the auction house? Things are good, Canopy, I responded. If you're calling 'cause I haven't dropped anything by in a while, you're not in luck. Company 7's tightened up on security ever since the Cassie incident. Not anything you should worry about. I shook my head. No, actually, I'm calling because I need information, I confessed. Tell me, old friend, what do you know about the painter Isabella Corelli? He frowned enough that I could taste the concern even through my laptop. Nothing good comes from seeking a Corelli, he warned. Best to stay away from the whole painting business. It isn't for me, I explained. I told him about the woman who'd come earlier, and after a full 2 minutes of practically begging him for information, he took the bait. And quite a lot, he said. Corelli's paintings were very odd in nature. The first of her paintings had been recovered in a little house destined to be destroyed in a place called Merchanti, small enough not to have any useful information on it online, but big enough to make it a notable site. A couple of teenage explorers found the little house, entered it, found an old, weathered sack and opened it. The paintings, glorious yet wretched things, were inside. The blues had a certain aura of the sea to them. The yellows had an odd dullness. And the reds were bleeding out of the painting. The moment they touched one, a canvas of 3 teenagers on the beach, sand as yellow as where they stood and blues that matched the color of the sea, the painting started to bleed. The trio, both in life and in art, started to bleed from their eyes, cheeks, hands, everywhere. By the time the police found them, they were unrecognizable husks of muscle and bone. The report was kept hidden away from the public due to its unfathomable nature. My friend Canopy, though, worked for the company responsible for recovering and holding the artifacts in relative safety, hidden from thought and knowledge from the rest of the world. The rest of the paintings found within the little black sack offered similar effects. A friend, though more workplace acquaintance of Canopy's, had been one of the first to recover a Corelli. There was a house across the world in Canada she and her team was sent. The couple who'd been living there were gone. Just gone. Neighbors had noted their disappearance and flagged it with the police. When the police nor higher authorities could not find a cure and people started to go missing in the area, one by one someone high up had the idea to call over the company. They arrived, she and her team found the artifact locked away in the heart of the house. The house had changed too, warping from the blueprint they were given to something accursed, bigger on the inside, and filled with an almost artificial glow. And at the center of the house they found it, a room, locked away. Inside they discovered the empty frame of a painting, one, according to sources, had been one of a house. But now this house sat on a little table, plastic, painted, and uncharacteristically childlike. Inside the dollhouse were figures and models of all who had gone missing. All were placed in the back of the rooms, faces frowned, cartoonish, and wearing clothes far too old for the time. This new dollhouse matched the interior of the shifted house. Canopy's friends seized the artifact away, throwing a net of bone silver upon it, realigning the house and neutralizing its cursed effects. The victims were never returned, forever bound to the house. "I'm just saying, Quentin," he insisted, wagging a finger. "You do absolutely do not want to mess with a Corelli." I got it, I assured. "I'll even wear silverback glass." He sighed, and signed off. Silverback glass, I hoped, would be enough to shield me from the effects of the painting, had Stephen located it. For those unaware of the slang, they're glasses backed with newly blessed silver and pressed with iron. I'd used them a few times to block out the effects of some nauseating artwork, and I hoped it would neutralize the painting the old lady wanted. The day quickly passed into the afternoon. "Stephen!" I called. He came running over, notebook in hand, square glasses in the other. "Have you located to whom the face of God was sold to?" He smiled. He'd found it. "What do you know about Peyton Phillips?" I started to answer, but he continued anyway. "He's a killer, serial at best, though they never found the evidence required to convict him. And we're in luck, he owns a house just a few miles away." "Excellent," I confirmed. "I'll take Matt and Astor with us and see if we can strike a deal." I started to walk now, heading to the security/recoverance team. "Judging by recent activity, he may not be there at all," Stephen added. "House looks decrepit, and the neighbor I talked to on Facebook dash." "Really, Stephen, Facebook?" I joked. "You can never trust Facebook." "Like I was saying, it looks like he hasn't been there in years," Stephen concluded. "Are we banking on dead, missing, or on the run?" A lanky man with a crew cut bro nodded me. "I'm betting on dead," he announced. "What are we betting on?" "Matt," I greeted. I told him to fetch Astor, then told him what we were about to do. We haggled on the bonus I'd be giving them, but they agreed once I revealed to them the unlimited funding the old lady had given. I retrieved silverback glass for the four of us, and by the hour, we were ready. Another quarter of an hour brought us into a little gated community, where I paid off the lazy security guard, parked our car in front, and observed it. Stephen was right. It didn't look like anyone had been there in years, save for maybe, judging by a wide-open door and the messy scene beyond the windows, reckless hobos or worse, stereotypical teenagers. "So what's so dangerous about this art? We gotta wear silverback," Astor pointed out. I told her it had killed 50 people more than half a century ago. She got the message. We exited the van, and entered the house. The place, no offense, looked like the insides of an uncleaned vacuum cleaner. We coughed at every turn. And we also had no idea if he still had the painting or not. Still, the place was thick with dread, and the implacable fear shot at me like knives. Luckily, Astor was a canary, those who had the ability to sense the things beyond normal human perception, born with an attraction to the uncanny and a desire to find and, in most cases, destroy. These also worked in the reverse reaction. A canary would be more likely to be hounded and attacked by the whimsical and weird, but Astor could put up a hell of a fight. Astor stopped us in our tracks, then pointed to a room, white door closed yet yearning to be opened. "There," she whispered. "Something powerful, divinely so." Matt led the way, opening the door a crack and pointing his gun inwards. Nothing reacted, and pushed the door open. The room was a sea of endless black, despite the beating sun that had lit the entire house. And the endless void pulsed, and I saw brief shadows inside, swirling and reaching out. "What the hell?" Matt snapped, though it was more of annoyance than fear. Anything that didn't immediately attack us was probably safe. A huge emphasis on probably. "There's more than one thing in there," Astor informed, reaching into the void, sensing further. "3 things, one powerful, one weak, and one, something more alive than dead." Astor's face drained of color as she sensed the insides. I dragged her hand out of the void before anything could happen. Canaries were useful, yes, but more drawn to the forces of oddity. "Can we dispel this?" Stephen retrieved his tablet, signed in and went for his e-library. "I think," he swiped to a certain grimoire we'd scanned. "Yeah." He said some words I couldn't fathom then, something that started with Xanthaniel and ended with Tiananesa. Within seconds the darkness dissipated. Stephen was a damn good assistant, yes, but he was an even better sorcery. Another win for Team Auction Gang. Matt cheered. We looked at him in confusion. "We really need a team name." Stephen rolled his eyes. "Let's grab the artifacts and go." We all agreed. The room was white. A clean, sterile white. Splotches of paint dotted the room, and 3 paintings sat in frames in the center, floating in place. Enchanted, I assumed. One of the 3 paintings had, by any description, exploded. This, I assumed, was the cause beyond the still wet splotches of paint. "I assume this is your doing, Stephen," Matt calmly murmured. The other man nodded. I noted the 2 frames. One was covered in cloth, and the other displayed a barren cityscape at night, lights all but turned off. Even through the silverback, I saw shadows moving within the city, alive in artificial glory. I reached over to uncover the hidden frame. "No," Astor held me back. "I don't think silverback can protect us from witnessing dash." She felt the thing through the frame, this. "All right," I agreed. I trusted her. I went around it, checked the back, and sighed in relief as a label announced that it indeed was the face of God. I nodded to the team. "We got it. Let's get back and hand it over." Leaving was easier than getting in. A feeling of relief washed over us as Matt covered the artifacts in netting, reducing, though not neutralizing its power. The drive back was peaceful, to our relief, and soon, I was handing the painted cityscape over to Stephen for storage, and meeting with the old lady in the office. "Greetings, Miss Dash," I shrugged. "My name is not so important," she laughed, reaching out towards the painting. I drew it back. Despite her age and her genuine tone, I had concerns for why exactly she wanted the artifact. "My canary said it's a piece of great power," I raised. "Something even silverback glass can't hide. Do you really want to die looking at this thing, or is this a weapon?" She smiled, and dismissed her men. "My reason for wanting it is genuine. Did you know Dash?" She paused, thinking, "Corelli once said those who observe the painting will be given life anew." I shook my head. "No, tell that to over 50 dead patrons," I pointed out. "You know, I could just hand this over to the company." She sighed wistfully. "They were not ready to behold the wonders of the painter," she murmured. "But I am." Something about the way she said seemed true. "And I'm more than willing to pay for it." She snapped her fingers, and her men walked in, placing down an additional 4 briefcases filled with money. "This is a lot of money you're willing to spend on this," I commented, checking the money, one stack at a time. "The dead don't have the need for material concerns," she chuckled. "And if I am given life anew, I will not be concerned with such finite things." "Well," I sighed, "at the end of the day I don't really know anything about Corelli, so you've got yourself a deal." I extended a hand. She shook it. "Thank you, Mr. Lorino." I placed the painting, still covered in cloth, in a box, handed it to her, and away she went. 4 briefcases lined my offices, enough to last us a long time. Another day at the office perhaps, another mission well done. "I don't like it," Astor murmured, watching her leave the building. "We should have sent it to the company." I handed her a stack of cash. "I know you can't say no to ice cream." Still, she hesitated. "I don't trust whoever the hell she is. Anyone who wants a Corelli has got to be mad. How the hell does everyone but me know about Corelli?" I stammered, confused and bewildered. "Let's just get ice cream." "Let's." Astor and I walked out, gathered the team and walked out into the night. Another day, done. Another mission, complete. Perhaps the artifact would resurface, but perhaps another day, another time. Now, it was time to celebrate, for the fleeting moments of life were the ones we always took for granted.